VOA News, I'm Tommy McNeil. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky marked the 500th day of the war Saturday by hailing the country's soldiers in a video from a Black Sea island that became the symbol of Ukraine's resilience in the face of the Russian invasion. Speaking from Snake Island, Zelensky honored the Ukrainian soldiers who fought for the island and all others who defended the country. The U.S. military says Russian fighter jets have harassed American drones over Syria for the third day in a row. AP correspondent Karen Shamas.
In a statement, the U.S. military said that Friday's encounter between Russian aircraft and 3 U.S. MQ-9 drones lasted for about 2 hours. The head of the U.S. Air Force's Central Command said Russian jets flew 18 unprofessional close passes. He said this caused the drones to react in order to avoid unsafe situations. Tension between Russian and U.S. troops is not uncommon in Syria, as both countries conduct patrols on the ground as well as overflights. I'm Karen Chamas.
President Biden leaves on Sunday for a European trip that focuses on NATO relations in the effort to help Ukraine. AP correspondent Jackie Quinn.
President Biden's three-nation visit begins in the UK, where he meets with King Charles at Windsor Castle, their first visit since the coronation. Then he'll meet with Prime Minister Rishi Sunak. Next is a flight to Lithuania, which is hosting the annual NATO summit. Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg Friday said,
"At the summit, we will make Ukraine even more stronger and set out a vision for its future."
President Biden participates in meetings Tuesday and Wednesday, and then Thursday travels to NATO's newest member nation, Finland, showcasing the global support for the expanding alliance. I'm Jackie Quinn.
This is VOA News. An airstrike in a Sudanese city Saturday killed at least 22 people. That's according to health authorities, one of the deadliest air attacks yet in 3 months of fighting between the country's rival generals. The assault took place in a neighborhood in the neighboring city of the capital, Khartoum. According to a brief statement by the health ministry, the attack wounded an unspecified number of people. Ministry posted video footage that showed dead bodies on the ground with sheets covering them and people trying to pull the dead from the rubble. Others attempted to help the wounded. People could be heard crying. Israel's UN ambassador calls on the Secretary General to retract his condemnation of the country for excessive use of force in its targeting refugee camp in the West Bank. AP correspondent Julie Walker with more.
The UN says Secretary General Antonio Guterres stands by his views and that Israeli airstrikes and attacks on the Jenin refugee camp killed 12 Palestinians, including 4 children, and injured 140. Tamara Al-Rifai with the UN's refugee agency UNRWA says a colleague on the ground noted this.
In such a densely populated camp, the cemetery is already full.
And there was significant damage to the camp.
There are some 900 houses that have been damaged.
Israel says the offensive focused on Palestinian militants targeting innocent Israeli civilians, and the Secretary General's remarks were shameful. I'm Julie Walker.
Hundreds of protesters defied a ban Saturday to march in central Paris against police violence. A week after riots sparked the killing of a teenager in the Parisian suburb. Reuters' Alice Rizzo explains.
Police were seen dispersing the crowd from Paris's huge Place de la République, sending several hundred people towards the white Boulevard Magenta, where they were seen marching peacefully. Paris police initially banned the protest, saying it was a risk to public order. A week after France was rocked by riots sparked by the killing by a police officer of 17-year-old Naël at a traffic stop in a suburb of the French capital. French police has come under scrutiny after the incident. Saturday's protest at the Place de la République was called by the family of Adama Traoré, a black Frenchman who died in police custody in 2016 in circumstances similar to the killing of George Floyd in the United States.
That is Reuters' Alice Rizzo reporting. You'll find more at voanews.com. I'm Tommy McNeil, VOA News.
This is VOA News. I'm Joe Ramsey. Pope Francis has taken another step to mark his stamp on the Catholic Church with the selection of 21 new cardinals, some coming from countries where Catholicism isn't widely practiced. AP correspondent Jackie Quinn reports.
The announcement was made during the Pope's weekly Sunday appearance overlooking St. Peter's Square. He's chosen 21 new cardinals, including prelates from Jerusalem and Hong Kong, where Catholics are a small minority, saying they will manifest the bond for churches around the world. His selections are viewed as a look toward the future, installing the group of churchmen who will select his successor. The new cardinals will be installed September 30th. I'm Jackie Quinn.
Heavy rains lashed India's capital and surrounding areas on Sunday. India has recorded 153 millimeters of rain over the past 24 hours, the third highest in the month of July in more than 2 decades. More rain was predicted over the next 2 days. Russian-installed authorities in the Crimean Peninsula have reported shooting down a cruise missile near the city of Kerch and briefly suspending traffic on the Kerch Bridge that links the annexed territory to Russia. In the nearby Russian region of Rostov, authorities also reported shooting down a missile. Such attacks far beyond the front line have become common during the war in Ukraine that has just surpassed its 500-day mark. Last October, a massive explosion severely damaged the Kerch Bridge, leaving it out of commission for weeks. In what appeared to be the first direct admission of Kyiv's involvement, Ukraine's Deputy Defense Minister Hanna Maliar listed the attack among the country's main achievements in the war so far. This is VOA News. U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen said 10 hours of meetings with senior Chinese officials in recent days were direct and productive, helping stabilize the superpower's often rocky relationship as her 4-day Beijing trip ended. Reuters correspondent Olivia Chan reports.
U.S.-China relations are at a low over national security issues, including Taiwan, U.S. export bans on advanced technologies, and China's state-led industrial policies. Washington has been trying to repair ties between the world's 2 biggest economies. A senior Treasury official said the trip, as expected, did not result in specific policy breakthroughs, but was very successful in terms of re-establishing contact and building relationships.
Reuters correspondent Olivia Chan. A Zimbabwe magistrate court on Sunday tossed out an appeal by the largest opposition party after police blocked their much-anticipated pre-election campaign rally. The gathering, where the Citizens Coalition for Change was expected to formally launch its election manifesto, was the 6th to be quote-unquote banned or unlawfully disrupted in a week, according to the party. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu signaled impatience on Sunday with disruptions caused by resurgent demonstrations against his judicial overhaul plans, summoning his attorney general for a cabinet discussion of police countermeasures. Reuters correspondent Jillian Kitchener reports.
Netanyahu said both opponents and supporters of the justice system reform have the right to demonstrate peacefully, but
while the government has not considered restricting this right, it is requested to receive a report on what is the enforcement policy regarding violations of the law that infringe on the basic rights of millions of citizens and which are carried out almost on a daily basis during the demonstrations.
Critics say the bill's passage would open the door for abuses of power. But Netanyahu, who is on trial on graft charges he denies, says the aim is to restore balance among branches of government.
Reuters correspondent Jillian Kitchener. Women in Iran who have long been barred from attending football matches except for rare occasions will be allowed into stadiums during the upcoming season, a top official said Sunday. The head of Iran's Football Federation made the announcement during a live broadcast of the draw ceremony for the upcoming season of Iran's top-level football league. Iran has largely barred female spectators from football and other sports stadiums since the Islamic Revolution of 1979, despite no law banning their participation. I'm Joe Ramsey.
This is VOA News. I'm Steve Miller. NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg announced Monday Turkey had agreed to send Sweden's accession protocol to join the alliance to the Turkish parliament, describing the decision as a historic step.
This is good for all of us. This is good for Sweden. Sweden will become a full member of the alliance. It's good for Turkey because Turkey is a NATO ally that will benefit from a stronger NATO. And then, of course, it's good for the whole alliance.
Stoltenberg made the announcement after talks with Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan and Swedish Prime Minister Ulf Kristersson on Monday. Sweden's NATO accession had been held up by objections from Turkey since last year. At the NATO summit in Vilnius, Lithuania, a main question will be whether Ukraine should join the alliance, even though there will be no vote on that issue. VOA Eastern European Bureau Chief Miroslava Gangadze.
Before departing Europe this week, U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan said Ukraine still needs to lay some groundwork before it can join NATO.
Vilnius will be an important moment on that pathway towards membership because the United States, our NATO allies, and Ukraine will have the opportunity to discuss the reforms that are still necessary for Ukraine to come up to NATO standards.
NATO has said it is ready to support Ukraine's reforms to its security and defense systems. Miroslava Gangadze, VOA News.
Ukrainian officials say that the country's forces have recaptured 193 square kilometers of territory since launching their counteroffensive. Also, Poland, which serves as a hub for military aid for Ukraine, says it has detained a 15th member of a Russian spy network. For additional stories 24 hours a day, be sure to visit our website. This is VOA News. Israel's parliament gave preliminary approval to a bill early Tuesday that limits some Supreme Court power. The new bill seeks to curb on the Supreme Court's power to void decisions made by the government, ministers, and elected officials by ruling them unreasonable. Critics argue that this judicial oversight helps prevent corruption and abuses of power. Proponents say the change will facilitate effective governance by curbing court intervention. When it comes to taking stock of global emissions, there is a so-called elephant in the room: the world's armed forces. Reuters' Angela Johnston explains.
Militaries are among the world's biggest consumers of fuel. They account for 5.5% of global greenhouse gas emissions. That's according to an estimate by international experts last year. Another expert said hundreds of millions of tons of carbon emissions may currently be unaccounted for. Basically, what militaries do abroad doesn't need to be reported. That would cover anything from flying jets to sailing ships to training exercises. That kind of work was left out of the 1997 Kyoto Protocol and the 2015 Paris Accord.
Reuters reporter Angela Johnston. Torrential downpours pounded the U.S. Northeast on Monday, threatening catastrophic flooding across the region, where rains have washed out roadways, overwhelmed rivers, forced numerous rescues by boats. We hear more from Reuters reporter Zachary Goldman.
Local media reported one woman died as she was swept away by floodwaters as she attempted to leave her home with her dog on Sunday. More inclement weather is forecast for the already hammered region. The National Weather Service said some 13 million Americans were under flood watches and warnings issued from eastern New York State to Boston and western Maine to the northeast, where as much as 7 inches of rain were expected to fall.
Zachary Goldman of Reuters News. The delivery of humanitarian aid to Syria rebels in the northwest from neighboring Turkey is virtually certain to get a green light to continue from the United Nations Security Council, but the big question is for how long. The current authorization for aid deliveries through the Bab al-Hawa crossing is set to expire, but the Council has 2 rival extension resolutions before it on a vote on Tuesday. A Russian resolution would continue aid deliveries for 6 months, and a Brazil-Switzerland resolution backed by most council members and Secretary General Antonio Guterres would authorize a 12-month extension. For pictures, videos, stories, and more, follow the Voice of America on social media. I'm Steve Miller, VOA News.